مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. بعد أطول معركة في الحرب أعلنت وزارة الدفاع الروسية السيطرة الكاملة على مدينة باخموت التي تلقبها أوكرانيا بالقلعة المنيعة. ورغم تقليل بعض الخبراء العسكريين من قيمة باخموت الاستراتيجية، إلا أن آخرين أكدوا أن روسيا ستحولها إلى نقطة انطلاق للسيطرة على مناطق أخرى. للمزيد من المتابعة ينضم إلينا الأستاذ الكسندر فوترافيرز، زميل مشارك في معهد الدراسات العالمية بجامعة جنيف. أستاذ الكسندر، مرحبا بك معنا. ما الذي حدث في باخموت؟ هل نحن أمام نقطة تحول في هذه الحرب؟
The Battle of Bakhmut has been going on for almost a year now, and what we have seen is a very strong attrition, first on the side of Russia. So Russia has been losing five, and at certain crucial moments, 9 times more troops than the Ukrainians, and steadily this attrition battle has evened out. And in the recent weeks, and indeed in the last 3 months, the Ukrainians were losing just about as many troops as the Russians. The battle is now complete in the sense that the Ukrainians have steadily pulled away the forces that remained, and the sole occupiers of Bakhmut today are Russian forces.
طيب، ما هي الأهمية الاستراتيجية لباخموت؟ في البداية تم رفع أهميتها، ثم ذهبت وسائل الإعلام وبعض السياسيين إلى التقليل من أهميتها الاستراتيجية بعد خسارتها. ما الحقيقة هنا؟
We are in an information warfare and information campaign. So there have been voices that have said from the very beginning that Bakhmut was not a significant and important city. I would say in the grand scheme of things, the amount of territory that has been gained is negligible in the face of the immense efforts that have been put together in order to try and capture the city. On the second hand, the Battle of Bakhmut has started for 2 reasons. One reason was that the Russians had to leave, to abandon the city of Kherson, which is a much larger city in the south of Ukraine. And because they had to pull out there, they believed that there was a necessity to make territorial gains someplace else. So I think this is one of the reasons why Russia was very adamant in capturing this city. The second reason is that there have been in this particular area very intense fighting in 2014, and this was extremely important for the territorial continuity of the so-called or self-proclaimed or independent state, which has now been essentially annexed to Russia, which is run by certain volunteer military units of the Republic of Donetsk, which, as I said, have been essentially annexed to Russia.
باعتقادك هل سيتغير الوضع في باخموت بعد مغادرة قوات فاغنر المدينة على ما أعتقد خلال اليومين المقبلين؟
Yes, we can expect that there is going to be change. What form will this change take? This remains to be discussed, but definitely we know for a fact that the forces that captured Bakhmut that were fighting in the last few weeks, these troops have been pulled away, and different new forces have taken the duty of occupying the gained territory. Now, this is not something that is uncommon with Russian forces, but we do know that the troops, be it Wagner, be it paratrooper units, the ones that were tasked with taking the city were very professional forces, very good quality troops. The troops that are now being sent in to just take control of the territory, well, these are essentially conscripts, and so the quality of these forces is not as high as those forces that took the city a few weeks ago.
هذا ما يدفعني لسؤالك: هل منحت معركة باخموت فاغنر دعاية مجانية؟
I'm not sure, because Wagner is a group which is illegal under Russian state law. It exists solely because of the links between certain people in the Wagner group and certain very high up persons in the Russian administration and government. And what we have seen is that Wagner has been definitely useful to alleviate some of the difficulties, some of the challenges, the lack of qualified personnel in the Russian army. But on the other hand, they have been extremely critical of the Russian military. So this is probably not very good for the Russian effort in the coming weeks and the coming months.
ماذا عن الهجوم الأوكراني المضاد؟ إلى ماذا يحتاج الأوكرانيون لإطلاقه بعد أن حصلوا على الF-16؟
Okay, we have definitely heard from the American president that after many months of political and diplomatic pressure, he has allowed a certain number of countries to make American-built F-16s available to Ukraine. This doesn't mean that the Ukrainians have a single one of these airplanes today. And just to put this into perspective, the American estimate is that it will take 18 months for the Ukrainian Air Force to be able to use this airplane. And we have a number of other estimates that are perhaps more optimistic.
بعد أن شرحنا ما حدث في باخموت ميدانيا، كيف يبدو الوضع في باقي الأراضي الأوكرانية؟
And you have, because it can take a while to talk about all of the different battle sets, but perhaps I will try to limit myself to the air situation, the ground situation. In the air, we are in a bit of a difficult situation today for the Ukrainian air defenses, because these air defenses are very, very capable, but they are running very low on missiles. And what we are seeing is an attempt by Russia to use all kinds of guided weapons, some of them that were not really intended to strike at ground targets, because they're using surface-to-air rockets, for example, to create more targets to get the Ukrainians to use and to shoot more missiles than they really have. So this is a war of attrition. Outside of this, neither side really has any kind of even local air superiority in this fight. We have seen the Russians using more and more of their air assets, and I would say this is perhaps a gain on the short term, but on the long term, we're seeing that the Russian Air Force is having more and more difficulty to keep up with the pace of these operations, and we are seeing more and more of these airplanes breaking down, being unavailable for combat use. So, as I said, we're seeing both sides suffering heavy attrition. On the ground, the Ukrainian military is very much reinforced. The Ukrainian government has announced that 9 mechanized brigades have been newly formed for this counteroffensive, or perhaps several counteroffensives that have been announced. The plan is to have 20 such mechanized brigades equipped with Western equipment available this summer. These forces have not been engaged so far. At least we do not believe that these forces have been committed to the fight, although we have seen what is called shaping operations, sometimes in the south, sometimes in the north of the battlefront. On the Russian side, we are seeing a very substantial strengthening of troop numbers. So in November of last year, the Russians had about 200,000 troops. They have now doubled these numbers, and we see that today the Russians are aligning about 400, just short of 400,000 soldiers, but the quality of these troops is much lower than it was originally. And we are seeing also very substantial how can I say, lacks in equipment, so shortages of modern equipment and supplies for the Russian forces. So for the moment, Russia is limited to a relatively defensive stance. They have been digging all sorts of trenches and defensive preparations, but we cannot really see any offensive actions on the side of Russia for the foreseeable weeks and months.
وكانك تخبرني أن الهجوم الأوكراني المضاد سيكون في الصيف وليس خلال هذا الربيع. كما تم الإعلان عن ذلك سابقا.
We don't know that, and actually I would be very surprised if there was only one single counterattack. The best example, historical example, is last August. We saw that there were two counterattacks instead of one. And there are today a lot of discussions that there may be as many as 4 different areas where such limited counterattacks would be able to take place. The reason for the multiplication of these different counterattacks instead of one big armored attack is probably that the Ukrainians and their advisors and supporters feel that with the reinforcement of the Russian front line and with the reinforcement of Russian numbers, a single counterattack is probably not going to produce a decisive effect. And so several different attacks in key areas are going to be important in order to target, to have a decisive effect on the Russian armed forces.
لماذا باعتقادك تراجع الحديث عن المسار السلمي؟ اختفت فجأة المبادرات التركية والصينية.
There have been several Western diplomats from France, Germany, and other countries that have actually said that some points of the Chinese peace plan were extremely valid and needed to be pursued. To answer your question, on the other hand, of course, both sides are in a situation where they have absolutely no interest in negotiating a form of peace today, because a peace today would mean that Ukraine would have lost 20% of its territory, and Russia would be in a very difficult situation as well, because it has not reached any one of its major objectives.
لأفهم قصدك بصورة أوضح، ما المفترض أن يحققه الأوكرانيون على الأرض قبل التفاوض؟
Of the territories that they have lost. I believe also that a certain number of other countries have other motives and other objectives, which may be more long-term than these objectives of territorial reconquest. And as I said, we are seeing just these past 24 hours that the Ukrainians are very creative with the kinds of actions that they can perform against the Russian military, against Russian infrastructure, against the Russian government. So we could expect that the Russians will continue to be relatively creative with their actions in the coming months.
أستاذ الكسندر فوترافيرز، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you so much.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.